This series is about role-playing games that have shaped our hobby and continue to do so. With so many games on the market and so many older games and editions available in PDF and print-on-demand forms from Drive-Thru, RPG and elsewhere, the hobby can be a confusing place for new and even some veteran players. Here, I'm attempting to dispel some of that confusion by running through the history of each game, giving an overview of its play features, sharing my thoughts on it, and outlining the essentials to pick up if you want to give it a go. Previously, in Traveller. Games Designers Workshop published the generic Traveller science fiction role-playing game in 1977, an edition now known as Classic Traveller. In 1987, after feeling that they should retire the Traveller game, GDW joined with Digest Group Publications to publish a second edition, MEGATRAVELLER, that compiled and updated Classic Traveller as well as aligning the game more towards its default setting, the Third Imperium uncharted space, than generic sci-fi. With a desire to bring all of its games in-house using a common system, GDW then published a third edition, Traveller The New Era, which updated the setting into a galactic post-apocalyptic mode, which, it is fair to say, isn't something every Traveller player is a fan of. With GDW going under, Imperium Games published Mark Miller's Traveller, or Traveller 4th Edition, or simply T4, under licence from Far Future Enterprises, a company set up by Traveller creator Mark Miller, to whom the Traveller property had fallen following GDW's demise. T4 was around for a couple of years, but with its own demise, the Traveller property was left in somewhat of a limbo. Enter the period that I like to call the interregnum, during which several companies picked up licenses to publish Traveller materials, usually the setting layered over another set of rules such as Hero, GURPS and D20. The interregnum ran for about 1998 to 2008, which brings us to the subject of today's video, Mongoose Traveller, the first edition of which arrived in 2008, the second in 2016 and an updated second edition in 2022. For me, as a fan more of the Traveller rules than its default setting, the interregnum was a bit of a mishmash. While I feel GURPS added some interesting concepts, particularly in books such as Far Trader, much of it was dedicated to GURPSifying the Third Imperium, and it is a perennial pain to convert from GURPS Imperial units and technology scales to Traveller's metric default and tech levels. Similarly for D20 and Hero, although the output from Quicklink for D20 Traveller did cross over well between systems. So, when the Judges Guild of the modern era, Mongoose Publishing, announced that they were picking up the Traveller licence, I was actually pretty happy. You see, before that, they had picked up a licence to publish an edition of RuneQuest, another of my favourite RPGs, and had actually done quite a good job with it. So, my hope for Traveller under Mongoose was high. Why do I call Mongoose the modern Judges Guild? Well, because they do two things that I feel characterise the Judges Guild of the 1970s and 1980s, picking up any and every licence they can and churning out product like there's no tomorrow. In their time to date, largely starting as a D20 third-party publisher, they have picked up licenses for RuneQuest, Traveller, 2300 AD and Paranoia games, as well as property licenses for Babylon 5, Conan, Judge Dredd, Lone Wolf, Slain, Lankmar and Starship Troopers. Is this a bad thing? No. That I have a number of Mongoose works in my gaming library, it is a testament to my opinion there. However, there are some problems that also mirror Judges Guild that I will go into through the course of this video. So anyway, Mongoose Traveller arrived in 2008 in a standard size book with a cover harkening back to the classic game, black with stark white titling and a flash of red cutting through like a laser bolt, seeking out the free trader Beowulf's failing hull. All good stuff. I snapped up a copy and was promptly disappointed by the layout. The game, great, all good. Rules-wise, the authors had taken a route that echoed classic Traveller, but had selected a layout that channelled T4. But regardless, Here was, finally, a reiteration of the Traveller rules and not just charted space wanged onto some other system. And then, my grief, the floodgates opened. If we remember that Classic Traveller comprised 8 books and 13 supplements, all of which were small and thin, if dense in text, this pales in comparison to the Mongoose output for first edition, and, as we'll see, its second edition too. Ignoring the introductory Book 0, between 2008 and 2014, 10 books, that is, extensions to rules, were published, and 16 supplements, all around the 120 to 160 page count or thereabouts, as large black books. Add to this 3 compendiums between 2010 and 2013. This is even before you reach any setting-specific information. That adds a further 23 or so books and accessories, such as map packs, to the roster for Charted Space alone. And that is a lot of books. You see, while I think it is great that a system receives support, I do feel that there is such a thing as too much support, and that was definitely the case for Mongoose Traveller First Edition. Anyway, aside from the plethora of books, Mongoose also jumped onto the OGL train with Traveller, as they had done previously for RuneQuest. This attached their version of Traveller to Open Gaming via Wizards of the Coast's Open Gaming license. A side effect of this was for Traveller to receive even more support through third-party publishers, in conjunction with additional publishers producing generic material for intellectual property-free generic 2d6 old-school science fiction. And thus did Traveller join the Wild West, alongside D20 and the OGL in general. When Mongoose began to license non-D20 game systems, such as RuneQuest and Traveller, to produce its own versions, it also began to withdraw from the market as a D20 publisher. This made a lot of sense. If you have systems in-house that you are paying license fees for, you would want to put as much focus on those systems as possible. This led to Slain, or Schlawn, a Celtic barbarian character from the pages of the UK anthology comic 2000 AD, and a property licence for role-playing by Mongoose at the time, shifting from a D20 to a RuneQuest base. The same happened with Judge Dredd, with the D20 Mongoose edition being replaced by rules drawn from Mongoose Traveller in 2009. Similarly, a number of other game series were published by Mongoose Traveller that used the first edition Mongoose Traveller rules, either by requiring the core rulebook of the game and presenting the series in supplementary or alternate settings ways, or as a standalone games incorporating a modified variant of the Mongoose Traveller rules. These include, from 2009, Babylon 5, Hammers Slammers, Judge Dredd, and another 2000 AD property, Strontium Dog. From 2010, Chthonian Stars. From 2012, an iteration of GDW's 2300 AD, later updated in 2021 to the second edition of Mongoose Traveller, and COWBOYS vs XENOMORPHS, a sort of mash between Aliens, the comic and movie Cowboys and Aliens, and using Traveller's system within a Wild West context in general. As an aside, the first 4 collections of David Drake's Hammers Slammers series are available for free with an Audible subscription. Not a sponsor, but I thought I'd add it. On the Judge Dredd front, alongside the continuing adventures of Megacity 1, Dredd and his associates in the pages of 2000 AD for the Dredd magazine, August 2023 sees the release of Volume 42 of the Judge Dredd Complete Case Files, an excellent series of compiled Dreadness. Again, not a sponsor, but if you are considering, or actually are, using those respective settings for your games, all of that makes for a good resource. Before we move on from the first to second edition Mongoose Traveller, one last thing to mention. In 2010, Mongoose released the first 9 of its books in little black book form. That is, softback scaled-down digest-size versions of the hardback books. Part of me suggests that this gave players options in their format of choice. The cynical in me suggests that it was a method of selling collectors the same material twice. But whichever, the final book in the sequence, Book 10, was never published in that form. On to second edition. This was released in 2016, after a fairly extensive development and playtest period, and it definitely shows. While largely compatible with its predecessor, it is still an update worthy of a second edition moniker, with virtually every part of it smoothed out in some way. Even better, the core rulebooks are gorgeous, well laid out, full colour, with plenty of art. Even better than that, from my perspective, is the second edition has moved away from copious books and supplements, focusing instead on a core set of rulebooks, the Traveller Core plus High Guard for spaceships, the Vehicle Handbook for vehicles, and Central Supply Catalogue for general equipment and weaponry, with additional volumes focusing on more specialised elements, settings and adventures. This to me is a far better model, and is not so overwhelming for players in their attempts to keep up. It also allows players and referees to have clearer paths before them in acquiring materials that they wish to use in play. For example, adventures set within the Spinwood Marches are clearly identified as such. The second edition's works have also delved into areas not previously considered to any great extent in previous editions of any form of Traveller. This is particularly true of the sandbox campaign The Pirates of DRINAX, originally started in 2011 under Mongoose First Edition, but completed and supplemented through the second edition era. 2018's The Great Rift, exploring not just the Great Rift and the sectors crossing into it, but also phenomena that might be found in otherwise empty regions and how these regions might be traversed. And Deep Night Revelation, a campaign of massive scope, heading into the deep uncharted regions of space. However, it has also delved into some well-trodden paths, in some cases too well-trodden. I sometimes get a feeling that Mongoose would do well to slow down and focus on quality. For every absolute gem they bring, or even bring back, to the current Traveller library, there seem to be 2 or 3 unnecessary, irrelevant or badly implemented works. Case in point, the recently released World Builder's Handbook, which is a very well executed and welcome return to the fold for a volume long since out of print from DGP's MEGATRAVELLER era, versus the somewhat pointless Sector Construction Guide, and the badly executed Trading Frontier. The latter being especially disappointing to me, as the area it covers is part of my favourite region within the Traveller canon. Your mileage obviously may vary, but I do find myself being very cautious when it comes to picking up Mongoose Traveller books at this point. From 2022, the second edition began receiving updates, beginning with the Traveller Core Rulebook 2022 update, and continuing similar updates for High Guard, Central Supply Catalogue, and further update releases coming. Unlike the transition from first to second Mongoose editions, these updates don't make vast changes, and so don't invalidate or otherwise make a little inconvenient for direct use of any current Mongoose Traveller books. Errata fixes, fresh art, a rethink on the use of perspective starship floor plans to move to the more common and more easily referenced top-down plans, and a few tweaks here and there. Within the general scope of the old RPG truism laid down by TSR some time ago, in that in order to make a return from a game, you need to reset its core books every 5 to 10 years, there being 6 years between the initial second edition's releases and the start of the updates, this is all well and good. If you have the old second edition books, the updates aren't really necessary, but they are a nice to have. If you are new to Mongoose Traveller, then it is the updated books that are clearly marked that you should be seeking out. And that brings us up to date in 2023. Mongoose Traveller is still going strong, with some strong releases mixed in with some not so strong, with the core rulebooks themselves being a fantastic rendition of this venerable game, and a worthy companion to the other versions of Traveller currently in print. And that we will get to in another video. Players coming from Classic Traveller or MEGATRAVELLER will find the general feel of Mongoose Traveller very familiar. There are differences, it's not the same game. Character generation is very similar, and the core rules guide a new player through the process very nicely indeed. I think this is important, because most people find out about role-playing games through Dungeons & Dragons first, and have their initial gaming experience with that, and therefore carry certain expectations into other RPGs. Traveller's system is very different from D&D's, so careful guidance is nice to help both newcomers and those who are carrying D&D expectations into giving Traveller a go. 6 characteristics are here: strength, dexterity, endurance, intellect, education and social standing, assigned by rolling 2 six-sided dice 6 times and arranging them as desired. Development is by life experience and careers, just as in other editions of Traveller. 4-year terms within a career might net some new skills, promotions and life events. Each career has mishaps and events which help to put meat onto the bone as the character's life path unfolds. Again, as with previous editions, this is one of the beautiful elements of Traveller. At the close of a character generation, you don't just get a collection of numbers, you get a sense of where those numbers actually came from. Mishaps and events really do enhance that aspect of the game. Another really nice addition is connections. During character generation, if players can draw connections between the events experienced by their characters and the characters of other players, then bonus skills are gained, as well as the sense of bringing the players together in creating a band of travellers together rather than individual characters apart. One event can be linked to one character, giving the character who rolled the event and the one being connected to it a bonus. Characters generated also tend to be on a similar scale in skills and expertise acquired to classic and Mega Traveller characters. Just a note to those who have materials from those editions, conversion is really easy. The game mechanics themselves are simple. A normal roll is 2d6 plus the level of whatever skill is being used, plus the modifier for whatever characteristic is most relevant, and any other modifiers the referee feels necessary, against a target number determined by the referee, and difficulty. Average tasks have a difficulty target of 8, easier tasks have a lower target, harder tasks have a higher target, equal to or exceed the target, and the task succeeds. A couple of tools thrown into this process that are very useful and open a number of tools within the rules and the referees at the table arsenal add a little complication, but not much. Boon and Bane mirror Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition's advantage and disadvantage, here having players roll an additional 6-sided die. With Boon, the lowest dice is discarded when determining the final 2 6-sided dice result, and with Bane, the highest dice is discarded. The other tool is Effect. Effect is simply the margin of success or failure. What you rolled versus what you needed to roll. Rolling a 10 against a target of 8 results in an effect of 2, for example. This is used explicitly in certain rules. It can also be used comparatively to determine the degree of success or failure, exceptional, average and marginal failures, through to marginal, average and exceptional successes. Effect also functions as a sort of critical hit mechanism, with the effect being applied to the damage a character inflicts against a foe with a successful attack during combat. This provides finer granularity to the game's core resolution over that presented in Classic Traveller. So while general play and style feels similar to Classic and Mega Traveller, there's more scope for adding detail and granularity than there is in those earlier editions. Combat, personal, vehicular and space, is handled in an abstract sense of position and range, although miniatures and maps can be used if that is your preference. I find the abstract works best for vehicle and space combat. The former because you don't then have to scale down speeds and manoeuvrability of futuristic transports to suit a more map and model base. The latter because, in a role-playing context, you can achieve a better narrative from the abstraction than you can from the forced specificity map and miniatures bring. Over the distances of space, and with the concept of sensor packages versus countermeasures, being able to focus on the players and the tension of the battle is better than visualising it all at once on the tabletop. That's true, really, of any edition of Traveller. Beyond that, Mongoose Traveller includes all of the core things that you would expect from any science fiction space RPG. World building, travel, trade and so on. The core rulebook scratches the surface of a lot of these subjects, and you'll need to delve into other core books for more detailed approaches. For example, High Guard, if you want to enhance spaceship operations and combat. I like Mongoose Traveller. I think its second iteration is better than its first, but either are good renditions of core Traveller principles. The rulebooks are clear, if suffering a little from typos and inconsistencies, many of which are cleared up in the 2022 update. There are some lovely introductions to core Traveller too, such as the Bane, Boon and Effect processes, neither of which are groundbreaking in game design as a whole, but are welcome additions here to the Traveller game. Where the Mongoose line fails somewhat is in its hit-or-miss mass of product, beyond the main core books. Here, we land in a wild west of material hastily regurgitated from earlier editions, including T20, unnecessary product that doesn't really add anything to Traveller gaming experience at all, and some absolute diamonds that I would have killed to have on my shelf even 40 years ago. Of course, opinions will vary regarding which products are trash and which are gems, but many are objectively one or the other. I realise that product volume is a Mongoose modus operandi, but I do believe that more than any other game that they have produced or supported to date, the company has hit on a wonderful iteration of a venerable classic. As such, I believe its supporting product deserves better quality control. Currently, there are 2 versions of Traveller in print, accepting previous editions made available via Drive-Thru-RPG and Far Futures Enterprises digital collections. Of the 2, Mongoose Traveller, 2nd edition, and Traveller 5, I would wholeheartedly recommend the Mongoose version of the game to players new to Traveller. I would also recommend it for players of Classic and MEGATRAVELLER who are seeking to move to a version that is currently being supported, because they will find Mongoose Traveller familiar and it has a great deal of support going for it. If you're coming from Traveller the New Era or T4, you may find Mongoose Traveller too simple and Traveller 5 too overboard, or you may find one or the other exactly to your liking. TNE being my favourite edition, I know which way I lean in this regard, but I will leave that discussion to when we cap the Traveller core game overviews off with a visit into Traveller 5 territory later. In summary, a well-executed revisit to the core principles of Traveller suitable for newcomers and veterans of the game alike, with plenty of support available for it, even if some of the supporting material is of a lower content quality than the quality of everything else published for the game by Mongoose that would lead you to expect. The only absolute essential is the core rulebook. However, to properly get your teeth into the game, I would highly recommend the Central Supply Catalogue, Vehicle Handbook and High Guard. Everything beyond that is down to your own taste in what you want from your Traveller game. For me, the recent World Builder's Handbook is a new absolute essential, and the Great Rift adds some long overdue rules on deep space phenomena and exploration that help to bring the gaps between worlds to life, or at least use them in interesting ways. The Traveller Companion is something worth mentioning. I don't consider it an essential, but it is a useful, if eclectic, compendium of options and additions. I wouldn't recommend it to new players, but it's certainly something to look at once they've got their teeth into the system proper. If you're delving into the default setting of the Third Imperium, then the Third Imperium sourcebook is a great addition. Further detail on specific settings within the Imperium can be found in Behind the Claw, the Spinwood Extents, and the Soleimani Front sourcebooks. The Training Frontier is another companion work to those volumes, and would have been an essential for me, but it is poorly executed. If you are already familiar with this area of charted space, you won't find much to excite you there. And maybe that is where my poor view of its book springs from. Although, it has to be said, I'm not exactly unfamiliar with the sectors outlined in the Behind the Claw volume. I mean, no Traveller player is, and I find that book perfectly fine. Other works depend on any speciality direction that you want to take a campaign. The Imperial Navy, mercenary, specialist forces all bring a specific type of experience to the table. Aliens Uncharted Space volumes all add details on Traveller's aliens, although from my perspective I would have preferred these volumes to have either focused on the aliens by region, a concept broken by the fact that Volume 1 includes Aslan, Zodani and Kukri in the same volume, cultures from opposite sides of charted space. Or to have the core major aliens in one book, with subsequent volumes being categorised. That is, say, Volume 1 including Vellani, Kukri, Aslan, Varga, Hivers and maybe Droin, with subsequent volumes grouping together humanity and uplifts and so on by theme. Although one could argue that with Volumes 1 and 2 together, you have the major players covered. There are plenty of adventures for the game, conveniently labelled as to the region that they are set in, although they can be adapted to any of these subsettings within charted space. The two giant campaigns, The Pirates of DRINAX and Deep Night Revelations, are among the aforementioned gems, both giving any group of Traveller players many, many hours of fun, without being railroads. Just a warning. Deep Night Revelations is by far the largest published campaign scope that I have ever seen for any game. And even with the 6 associated adventures, 7 if you count the Great Rift Adventure 2, Deep Night Endeavour, which can count as a prequel, there is still a lot of referee work needed. See my videos reviewing this product for some more. Mongoose's edition of 2300 AD is presented as an alternate setting for use with the Traveller rules. So although I will get to the whole 2300 lineage from the late 1980s on at some point, it is worth briefly mentioning here. Mongoose's 2300 AD requires the Mongoose Traveller 2nd Edition core rulebooks to play, so just bear that in mind if you want to visit the French arm. With the Twilight 2000 licence currently being with Free League, the original timeline links between that game and 2300 AD are in a bit of a tenuous situation. Mongoose Traveller, especially in its 2nd edition form, 2022 updates or otherwise, is a very welcome addition to this venerable game's fold. It is marred somewhat by some of its supporting products, but on the whole, Mongoose have delivered a great game and have triggered something of a Traveller revival. If you have any interest in science fiction role-playing, you should give it a look. If you want to give science fiction role-playing or Traveller itself a go, then this is the edition to plumb for.